The night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you question if something is wrong before you even know what's coming. Inside the house, a woman lay motionless, her body still, her breath gone. The man on the phone, her husband, sounded frantic. Desperate. His voice trembled as he begged for help. "My wife, she's not breathing." The dispatcher on the other end of the call kept her voice steady, asking the routine questions, the ones they've asked 100 times before. "Is she injured? Is there any sign of a struggle?" The man hesitated. A pause. Too long for comfort. Then finally, I don't know, she's just lying there." First responders arrived within minutes. The scene was calm, undisturbed. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Just a woman, lifeless, in what should have been the safest place in the world, her own home. A tragedy, they thought. A tragic accident. A heartbreaking loss. And for 4 years, that's what everyone believed. Then, one evening, everything changed. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Flashing lights cut through the dusk. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as officers approached the very same house where she had taken her last breath. This time, they weren't there to help. They were there to arrest the man who had once played the part of a grieving husband. Knocks turned into pounding. Then, open the door. Moments later, the door creaked open. The husband stood there, his face frozen in confusion. Or was it fear? He blinked, once, twice, as if his mind was struggling to catch up with reality. And her name was Emma Caldwell. She was 36 years old. A loving wife, a devoted mother, a woman with a kind heart and a smile that could brighten the darkest days. She worked as an elementary school teacher in Charleston, South Carolina, spending her days shaping young minds and her evenings making dinner for her family, laughing with friends, and posting pictures of homemade desserts on Facebook. To the outside world, her life seemed full, filled with love, stability, and the warmth of a happy home. Her husband, Daniel Caldwell, was well respected in the community. A financial advisor with a clean-cut image, always neatly dressed, always polite. The kind of man neighbors waved to as he mowed his lawn on weekends. He and Emma had been married for nearly a decade. To their friends and family, they were the perfect couple. They hosted barbecues, attended church on Sundays, and took family vacations to the mountains. But what no one saw, what no one suspected, was that beneath the surface, beneath the smiles, beneath the carefully curated images on social media, something was wrong. The date was September 14, 2018. It was a Friday night. Emma had spent the day teaching. Nothing seemed unusual. She left work at 4 p.m., sent a text to her sister about an upcoming family gathering, and picked up groceries on her way home. She parked her car in the driveway. Security cameras captured her walking inside at 5:42 p.m. She was never seen alive again. At 10:18 p.m., a frantic 911 call was placed from inside the Caldwell home. The voice on the other end was Daniel's. His words were shaky, his breathing erratic. "My wife, she's not breathing." Paramedics arrived within minutes. Emma was found at the bottom of the staircase, her body lifeless, her head resting at an unnatural angle. Daniel stood nearby, his hands gripping his hair, his face contorted in grief. He told authorities she had been drinking. That she must have slipped and fallen while carrying a basket of laundry. That he had been in the other room watching TV and only realized something was wrong when he found her lying there, unconscious. The initial investigation was brief. There were no signs of forced entry. No bruises or defensive wounds on Emma's body. The medical examiner ruled her cause of death as undetermined, citing blunt force trauma from the fall. A toxicology report showed alcohol in her system, just enough to suggest impairment, but not enough to be alarming. The case was closed. A tragic accident. A devastating loss for a grieving husband and a heartbroken community. Friends and family mourned. A candlelight vigil was held. Daniel stood at the front, his face wet with tears as he held their young daughter close. For 4 years, no one questioned a thing. Until someone did. A new investigator. A fresh set of eyes. A detail that had been missed the first time around. And with that one discovery, everything began to unravel. For 4 years, Emma Caldwell's death remained an afterthought, an entry in a case file that no one had reason to reopen. The paperwork told a simple story, a tragic fall, a grieving husband, and a community that had moved on. But the truth never stays buried forever. It started as a whisper. A doubt. A lingering feeling that something wasn't right. Emma's family never fully accepted the official story. Her sister, Megan Reynolds, had spent countless nights replaying that phone call from Daniel, the one where he told her Emma was gone. He had sounded devastated, his voice breaking under the weight of grief. But there was something else, too, a distance, a hesitation, like he was reciting a script instead of speaking from the heart. Then there was Emma's mother, Patricia Holloway, who had always been skeptical. She was a careful woman, she told reporters years later. She never drank heavily. She never rushed down the stairs. And if she had fallen, why didn't we hear about any broken bones? Any bruises on her arms? The doubts were always there, unspoken. But they were just feelings. And feelings alone weren't enough to reopen a case. Until the affair came to light. It was January 2023 when Charleston's Cold Case Unit received an anonymous tip. The message was brief, just a few words. You should look into Daniel Caldwell's love life after his wife died. It didn't take long for investigators to uncover the truth. Less than 3 months after Emma's death, Daniel had started seeing someone new. A woman named Hannah Blake, a 29-year-old marketing consultant he had met before Emma's death. It wasn't just a casual relationship. Within a year, Daniel and Hannah were living together in the same house where Emma had died. They took vacations together. Smiling photos surfaced on social media, Daniel on a beach, laughing with a cocktail in hand, Hannah leaning into his shoulder. It was as if his past life had never existed. Emma's sister was furious. He mourned my sister for what? A few weeks. Megan later said in an interview. And then he moved on with her. It was disgusting. Friends and family who had once stood by Daniel began to question everything. Had he really been the grieving husband he appeared to be? Or had Emma's death been more convenient than tragic? Charleston PD wasn't ready to make any accusations. But they were curious. If Daniel had been involved with Hannah before Emma's death, was it possible his wife's tragic fall had been something else entirely? Detectives began re-examining the crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and digital records. And that's when they found something that had been missed the first time around. The original medical examiner's report listed Emma's cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head due to an accidental fall. But a closer look at the injury pattern raised an unsettling question: was the wound really consistent with a fall down the stairs? A second opinion from a forensic pathologist suggested otherwise. The impact on Emma's skull was too localized, too precise. In most staircase falls, injuries occur in multiple places: bruises along the arms, fractured wrists from trying to break the fall, abrasions along the legs. But Emma's body had none of that. Just a single devastating head injury, as if she had been struck. Investigators needed more. They obtained a warrant for Daniel's phone records. What they found changed everything. In the weeks leading up to Emma's death, Daniel had made a series of internet searches that painted a disturbing picture. How to make a fall look like an accident. How long does it take for a body to go into rigor mortis? Head injuries that look accidental. Even more damning, they discovered deleted text messages between Daniel and Hannah. One, sent just 2 weeks before Emma died, read. I wish things were different. I just want to be free. Hannah had responded. Then make it different. And on the day Emma died, at 4:37 p.m., Daniel's phone pinged near a local hardware store. Surveillance footage later confirmed it. He had purchased a wooden mallet. It was never found in the house. But the shape of the impact on Emma's skull? It matched. What once seemed like a tragic accident was now something much darker. And for Daniel Caldwell, the clock was running out. For 4 years, Emma Caldwell's death had been written off as an accident. But the walls of deception were closing in. A cold case detective, Detective Sarah Whitmore, had been assigned to Charleston PD's newly reopened Unsolved Homicide Unit. She had spent over a decade working violent crimes and had a reputation for noticing what others missed. When she took on Emma's case, she saw something immediately troubling. The original autopsy report left too many questions unanswered. The trajectory of the injury, the lack of defensive wounds, the absence of any clear indication that Emma had fallen, all of it pointed to something far more deliberate. She ordered a second forensic analysis, this time using 3D reconstruction technology to map out the likely sequence of events that led to Emma's death. What the results revealed shattered the official narrative. Emma had not fallen. Her injury was not consistent with a stairway accident. The impact to her skull was blunt force trauma from a single, precise strike, the exact kind of injury one would sustain from an object like the missing wooden mallet Daniel had purchased the same day she died. For Detective Whitmore, that was enough to escalate the investigation. But she needed more than forensic evidence. She needed a witness. A confession. A fatal mistake from Daniel himself. And that's when Hannah Blake broke her silence. For years, Hannah Blake had refused to speak publicly about her relationship with Daniel Caldwell. She had stayed quiet, even as suspicions grew. Even as Emma's family demanded justice. But under the weight of an official subpoena, she had no choice but to sit down with detectives. At first, she denied everything. She claimed she and Daniel got together after Emma died. That she had nothing to do with his marriage, his past, or his secrets. Then Detective Whitmore placed a single sheet of paper on the table. A transcript of her own text messages with Daniel. Then make it different. Hannah's face went pale. Her hands trembled as she stared at the words she had once typed so casually. Finally, after 4 hours of questioning, she broke down. She admitted that she and Daniel had been together long before Emma died. That he had talked about wanting to be free, that he had discussed ways a marriage could end without divorce. And then she said something that would seal Daniel's fate. He told me that he had it all planned out. Hannah insisted that she had no idea what Daniel meant at the time. That she thought it was just talk. But looking back, she realized that he had been serious. Very serious. This confession was the final piece of the puzzle. Charleston PD had enough. It was 5:42 a.m. on a cold December morning when Charleston PD knocked on Daniel Caldwell's door. He was half asleep when he opened it, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, completely unaware that the past 4 years were about to catch up with him. The lead officer didn't hesitate. Daniel Caldwell, you are under arrest for the murder of your wife, Emma Caldwell. For a moment, he didn't move. He just stared, as if his mind couldn't process the words. Then, slowly, his expression shifted, from confusion to pure, calculated denial. This is a mistake, he said, his voice eerily calm. I loved my wife. But the officers didn't respond. As they pulled his hands behind his back and locked the handcuffs into place, the street outside began to fill with onlookers. Neighbors peeked from their windows. A few had their phones out, recording the moment. Within minutes, local news stations had arrived, broadcasting the arrest live. The headline flashed across screens across Charleston. Husband arrested for wife's murder, 4 years after her death. The world was finally seeing Daniel Caldwell for what he really was. As news of the arrest spread, the internet exploded. Social media was flooded with speculation, theories, and outrage. Some were shocked. "I can't believe he got away with it for this long." Others claimed they had always suspected something was off. Emma's family issued a statement, calling the arrest long overdue and thanking detectives for never giving up. But Daniel? He was already preparing for his next move, because he still believed he could beat the system. What he didn't know was that the evidence against him was far more damning than he ever imagined. She was the one who re-examined Emma's autopsy and found the inconsistencies. With confidence, she told the jury. The injuries on Emma Caldwell's skull were not consistent with a fall. They were consistent with a single, direct impact, deliberate force from an object. The courtroom was silent. Then, Hannah Blake, Daniel's mistress, walked to the witness stand. The moment she sat down, Daniel's gaze hardened. Hannah avoided looking at him. She took a deep breath and spoke. "Daniel told me he wished Emma was dead." Gasps rippled through the audience. "I didn't think he meant it at the time. I thought it was just something people say when they're unhappy." But then, weeks later, she was gone. She recounted the text messages, the secret conversations, and the chilling way Daniel seemed, relieved after Emma died. Then came Emma's best friend, Sarah Miller. "She confided in me. She told me she was scared. She said, she thought Daniel was watching her every move. That he was different lately. Colder." Tears streamed down her face. She said if anything ever happened to her, to look at him. At the defense table, Daniel sat unmoving, expressionless. But when the prosecution played a secretly recorded phone call between him and his mistress, his own words betraying him, his jaw clenched. If she was gone, it would all be easier. The weight of those words hung in the courtroom like a storm cloud. Then came the moment Emma's parents took the stand. Her mother, Margaret Caldwell, clutched a tissue, her hands trembling. "She was my baby. She was everything to us." Her voice cracked. "And he took her away." Emma's father, usually a quiet, reserved man, turned to the jury with tears in his eyes. "My daughter didn't get a second chance. Don't give him one." The courtroom was thick with emotion. People whispered. Some wiped away tears. Even some jurors looked visibly shaken. And then, for the first time in the trial, Daniel reacted. His hands tightened into fists. His eyes, usually blank and emotionless, flashed with anger. But was it remorse? Or rage that he was losing control of the narrative? Outside the courthouse, the world was watching. Every night, legal analysts dissected the case on national television. Some called it the most disturbing case of spousal murder in Charleston history. Others debated whether Daniel's lack of emotion was proof of guilt, or just his nature. Online, social media exploded with speculation. Hashtags flooded Twitter. Hashtag Justice for Emma. Hashtag Caldwell Trial. Hashtag He Did It. True crime podcasters broke down the evidence, and TikTok users analyzed Daniel's courtroom demeanor, looking for signs of deception. The nation was split. Some believed Daniel was an innocent man caught in a tragic misunderstanding. Others saw him for what the prosecution claimed he was. A cold, calculating murderer who thought he could get away with it. And now, as the trial neared its final days, only one thing remained. The verdict. Would justice be served? Or would Daniel Caldwell walk free? After 6 weeks of testimony, over 40 witnesses, and an avalanche of forensic, digital, and circumstantial evidence, the fate of Daniel Caldwell was in the hands of 12 jurors. The courtroom sat in tense silence as the judge gave them final instructions. You must weigh the evidence carefully. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard. The burden of proof is on the state. Take your time. At 4:32 p.m., the jury was led to the deliberation room. The world outside waited. True crime forums buzzed with speculation. Some believed the case was airtight, Daniel was guilty. Others still had doubts. Would the jury? Hours passed. Then days. Inside the deliberation room, jurors debated fiercely. Some believed Daniel's lack of emotion was telling, a guilty man who thought he was too smart to get caught. Others weren't convinced. There's no eyewitness. No murder weapon. Just a lot of suspicious behavior. Is that enough? On the fourth day, a note was sent to the judge. We have reached a verdict. The courtroom was standing room only when the jury filed back in. The judge asked, has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, stood. We have, Your Honor. Emma's parents clutched hands. Her mother's fingers dug into her husband's arm. Daniel sat motionless, his gaze locked forward. The paper was handed to the judge. A long pause. Then. In the matter of the state versus Daniel Caldwell, on the charge of first-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant. The entire room held its breath. Guilty. Gasps. 2 months later, on a cold December morning, Daniel Caldwell stood before the judge one last time. The prosecution argued for life without parole. This was a calculated act. He stole a life. He does not deserve freedom again. The defense pushed for leniency. There was no direct evidence. This was a circumstantial case. A life sentence is too harsh. Finally, the judge spoke. Mr. Caldwell, you carried out this act with deception and cruelty. You thought you had fooled everyone. You did not. I hereby sentence you. A pause. To life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emma's mother collapsed into sobs. Daniel Caldwell closed his eyes for the first time that day. A sharp breath in. A slow breath out. No words. No apology. Just the weight of his own fate crushing down on him. He was led away in handcuffs. He never looked back. The news spread like wildfire. Outside the courthouse, supporters of Emma's family embraced, cheered, cried. Emma's parents stood together in front of the cameras. We finally have justice. But no sentence brings our daughter back. Daniel's mistress, Hannah Blake, released a statement. I was manipulated. I regret ever meeting him. I only wish I had seen the truth sooner. Social media exploded. Justice served. But at what cost? He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. A guilty verdict doesn't erase the pain. Legal analysts debated the strength of the case. This sets a precedent. Circumstantial evidence can convict a murderer. But some still whispered. What if the jury got it wrong? Today, Daniel Caldwell sits in a maximum security prison, serving life without parole. He maintains his innocence. His lawyers filed an appeal in 2024, it was denied. From behind bars, he grants no interviews. His name fades from the headlines. But for Emma's family, the story never truly ends. Her mother still visits her grave every Sunday. Her father still keeps her childhood bedroom untouched. And every year, on the anniversary of her death, they light a candle and say her name out loud. Emma Caldwell. Daughter. Friend. Loved. Never forgotten. And in the town where she once lived, people still whisper about the case that shook the nation. A case of love, betrayal, and murder, hidden in plain sight. Some crimes leave no fingerprints. Just a trail of lies, and the truth waiting to be uncovered. Was justice truly served? Or was there more to this case than what was presented in court? What's your theory about what really happened that night? We want to hear from you. Comment your thoughts below. Do you believe Daniel Caldwell was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Or do you think there are still unanswered questions? Let's discuss. And if you want to see more deep dive investigations into cases that demand answers, make sure to subscribe. Because here, we uncover the final truth behind every crime. Hit like if you believe in justice. And we'll see you in the next case.